All right, so we're going to look at, in this video, acid and bases. And this is a big deal. This is probably, as far as what we're going into, this is going to be a little bit more important, I guess, on the next test. The water balance is huge, and obviously with coming off of looking at the kidney and the urinary systems, that's a pretty important thing. But you're going to see that this is tied in with the kidneys as well. And a big thing is, this is the constant battle that our body is always facing, the homeostasis on the acid-base level. So just to review, remember, acids are anything that when they dissociate, or basically when they break apart or ionize in water, one of the portions is going to be hydrogen ions. So hydrochloric acid, HCl, when it gets into water, hydrogen is going to be one of the ions. So it is an acid because of that. Bases, on the other hand, when they dissociate, one of the ions is going to be a hydroxyl group, an OH. Remember OH. So if I have sodium hydroxyl, that is a base, because when it gets into water, it's going to break apart right about here, and I'm going to have OH on the one side. Remember that everything is about water, because if I take this hydrogen ion and I mix it with equal parts of this hydroxyl group, I make H2O, and that is water. So the whole point of the balancing scale in nature of this is I'm going to have hydrogen on the acidic side and I'm going to have hydroxyl on the basic side. If I have equal amounts, if it is neutral, that is what we call water, right? So our body, actually all the way down here, our body is going to be slightly basic, which means it's on the hydroxyl side. It's going to be from 7.35 to 7.45. Again, if we're looking at it just with one number, it's 7.4. And if you look at that, that's going to be right in the middle of that little zone. All right, so that's just part of it. So our body's trying to keep that that little pH of the internal environment. The big thing, remember, is if I have this outside of this little zone, what's going to happen first and foremost is it's going to denature proteins, which just means it's going to unravel them. And like most of the ones we're really talking about are going to be enzymes, which are controlling reactions, and they have a very specific active site, if you can remember that. And if it gets altered in just a little bit, it no longer works, and that means our reactions that we need to happen don't happen, and not shortly after that do we have death. So acid-base balance involves regulation of hydrogen ions in our body fluids. Just slight changes of hydrogen ions can cause all kinds of problems. And it says here, alter the rates of enzyme-controlled metabolic reactions, and that's because that it affects the enzyme in that active site. It also shifts the distribution of other ions, and again, hormone actions, which again, hormones are proteins, just like enzymes. A lot of them are, and they won't function right because of the altered pH. pH number indicates a degree to which the solution is either acidic or basic. Remember that in the body, things that are basic are referred to as alkaline. So on this side, in chemistry, it is called basic, but in the body, it is called alkaline. And it's kind of weird when we talk about it, the more acidic a solution is, that means it is lower, the lower pH number we have. So as we get farther away from this middle point, which is 7, the whole pH scale goes from 0 to 14. So as we get closer to 0, we become more acidic. So the higher or the lower, I'll start with this one, the lower the pH is, that is the higher the acidity. So again, just to stick with it, the higher the pH number is, the higher the alkalinity, or the more potent the base is. Now, hydrogen ions, our body is constantly trying to push us towards a more acidic environment. That's the natural case of things, actually. Aerobic respiration of glucose produces carbonic acid, right? Breaking down glucose pushes more to acidic. Anaerobic, when we can't, when we don't have oxygen to use and we're burning glucose, we produce lactic acid. All right. Now, this is another thing. When we start messing with, right, fatty acids, that means trying to burn down lipids, right? When we're trying to not use, our body's using lipids as a source of energy, we produce things called acidic ketone bodies, which pushes us more towards an acidic environment. When we are trying to burn proteins, right? So these two right here are carbs, and they're normal. But when we start, starving ourselves of carbohydrates and we use lipids, we got to be careful about ketone bodies, which puts a lot of pressure on your kidneys and stuff too. When we try to burn proteins, we make a lot of sulfuric acid, among other things, but we'll talk about that later. Increasing the hydrogen ion content, which means I'm pushing it closer to the acidic side. Nucleic acids, right? Burning nucleic acids for energy. If you're doing that, you're going to have lots of problems anyway. But just the breakdown of them, again, is going to produce an acid. So all of these things, pretty much all of these metabolic reactions, are producing hydrogen ions, forcing us closer to an acidic environment. So when we look at acids and bases, now I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm not asking you to know these intricate things. This is really chemistry, and it would be great to know, but we've got enough stuff on our plate. Just know that acids can be strong acids or weak acids. Bases can be strong bases or weak bases, and all they're trying to do is, all our body's trying to do really is keep things on this, if we start having issues, we try to break it down and at least start with getting them to be weak acids. And again, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit. You can kind of see that a weak acid is this carbonic acid, which we talked about how it breaks up into hydrogen ions. That's why it's a weak acid. And this bicarbonate, I forgot to put the hydrogen there, bicarbonate, which is a buffer system. Now, again, I'm not worried too much about you understanding this part right now, but I just was going to point out that sodium bicarbonate is a weak base. You can kind of see this root, bicarbonate as kind of this go-between how it can work. But anyway, in acids, we have strong and weak acids. In bases, we have strong and weak bases. Now, when our body shifts this homeostasis, this set point, we can have some big problems, and I think I've made that fairly clear. Again, normal metabolic reactions generally produce more acid than base, and that's pretty much a given. And again, reaction includes cellular metabolism of glucose, carbohydrates, fatty acids, lipids, and amino acids, proteins, the big three. Maintenance of acid-base balance usually eliminates acids in one of three ways. It's either going to be scrubbed by these chemical buffer systems. Sorry, still kind of having problems with that tooth, but anyway, it's all good. And this is going to be the one that I want you to know is that bicarbonate buffer system. And again, because of the inability of me to write things out on this, I'm not going to try to do that too often. But the bicarbonate buffer system is one, and there's a couple more chemical buffer systems we're going to look at, but that's the main one. Then we're going to have respiration and kidney issues. Respiration is going to use the regulation of carbon dioxide to control it. We looked at this in the respiratory system. And of course, the kidneys are going to go straight to the source and going to excrete hydrogen ions. So chemical buffer systems, again, this one, I'm going to go over these, but this is the one I want you to really concentrate on. All right. But we have, buffers simply are chemicals that are going to kind of deal with strong acids and strong bases to try and bring them back towards our set point, right? And so buffers are substances that stabilize pH of a solution even when an acid or base is added. Buffers minimize pH changes in body fluids, and they have their components combined with strong acids to convert them to weak acids and strong bases to convert them to weak bases. That's what I just said on the last slide. We're really more concerned of trying to get these strong ones out of the way, even if it's just moving them down the line a little bit to the weak ones. But the bicarbonate buffer system, this is the chemical equation, and I do want you to know it. I'm sorry. And we've looked at it a couple of times. Again, on this side, there would be that double arrow that would be water, H2O, and carbon dioxide, right? This is that system, and this is going back and forth. So and that's why carbon dioxide acts as an acid in our body, because if I increase carbon dioxide, the seesaw will move towards this way, which is going to produce as a toll, basically, the hydrogen ions. So that's the way it works. There are two other buffer systems. The only thing I'm going to talk about with the phosphate, it is more, while both the bicarbonate and the phosphate are both intracellular and extracellular fluids, okay, inside the cell and outside. The big thing with this one is it is really the most important one of helping regulate pH inside the cell. That's why I want you to know that's kind of the only thing I'm really concerned about that with this. Now, again, if you look at this equation, it's pretty close, except the only thing is the phosphate, and then this is going to have one less on that, and it would go back and forth. Again, it's just a buffer system trying to help us keep our stable internal environment. And then finally, proteins can use it because they'll have an amino group on it, and this can act to buffer with the body. But once it gets into that could be a problem at that point. This is another little group that just kind of shows you some of the stuff going on. Again, the main one, bicarbonate system, is the one I want you to know. The only thing I want you to know about the phosphate is it is going to be the one that's in the cells and whatever else. I should have drawn a happy face on there. Wait a second. Ooh, I can't do it on this. Anyway, the only thing I want you to know about the phosphate really is that it's going to be an intracellular one. Now we're going to look at how our body controls it, and we start off with what we looked at in the respiratory system, how the respiratory system uses the blood value of carbon dioxide to regulate this. So if all of a sudden I have an increase carbon dioxide, that usually shows my cells have increased production of it. So I've exercised, so it's going to start producing more carbonic acid. Carbonic acid releases hydrogen ions. The respiratory center is stimulated. I start breathing deeper in and out, and that's going to remove more carbon dioxide, which in turn will start limiting the hydrogen ions, and things go back to normal. This again is that long equation that I just added that one part to on the last slide, I believe it was. But that's how our body, one of the main ways our body controls our pH is through breathing, controlling the rate and depth of breathing. And by removing carbon dioxide, it can directly affect the hydrogen ions. This is one of the reasons why you breathe heavy when you're exercising. Now, another reason is I need more oxygen to replace the oxygen that's stored, that we called it oxygen debt back in 2010. But this again is the equation. And so if I, just the same as if I increase this, I'm going to push it this way and I'm going to increase hydrogen ions. If, on the other hand, instead of increasing it, I decrease carbon dioxide because I'm breathing out, I am now pushing it this way and hydrogen ions decrease. All right, so that's how that works. Now the kidneys, again, go straight to the source. They are all about the hydrogen ions. Nephrons help regulate the ion concentration of body fluids by secreting them or excreting them into the urine. And are the tubular secretion, while these are like super small ions, not all of them get filtered out in the glomerulus. And a lot of them get reabsorbed just because they're following the pattern, they're following water and different things. But once we get to that distal convoluted tubule, our body, while it's measuring pH, if my pH starts getting low, which is another way of saying increased acidity, that distal convoluted tubule will start kicking those things out. It'll start pushing them out into the urine. So that is a big thing. And so it's also the ion secretion is linked to tubular reabsorption of the carbonic or the bicarbonate ions. And it's actually a give and take. Again, a lot of these things we talked about, and this is one of the things I wish when we don't really have time to get into in 210, but when we have those little protein channels that we said are used, and you had active versus facilitated. I said active always requires energy, and usually the energy is ATP, but sometimes what it is it's a give and take. So the hydrogen ion will bind to this part, it will open up the channel and let carbonic acid in, and when it does that, that pulls the hydrogen ion out, and that's kind of the give and take. So it's almost, you studied a little bit about the sodium-potassium pump. So potassium ends up being high outside the cell, and sodium is high inside the cell after that process called the action potential goes through, and this thing takes the sodium and pushes it out and takes the potassium and pulls it in, and that's kind of the same thing that goes on here. So when acids appear in the body fluids as a result of a metabolic process, the reabsorbed bicarbonate ions are going to help bind to the hydrogen ions to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is a weak acid. And this is going to, again, once we get this, and even if it's formed through the metabolic processes, when this comes by the lungs, right? Once it comes by the lungs, it's going to do the same thing that we showed you do it before. It's going to break down to hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, and then the hydrogen ions are going to bind with the oxygen and form water, or the bicarbonate. As it breaks down, the carbon dioxide will eventually be released, and the hydrogen ions will be used as it goes through. So it's still the same process. It's just two ways of getting rid of them. So the breakdown of amino acids produce sulfuric acid and phosphoric acid. So a high protein diet can cause excess acids. This is one of the main things that I always try to warn people about. It used to be there was a diet called Atkins diet, where they just ate protein, high protein diet, no carbohydrates. And it always carried a thing along, a little caveat along with it saying, do not do it unless you're under doctor supervision. And this is why, because it is deadly if you're not monitoring things. So kidneys compensate for extra acidity by increasing tubular secretion of hydrogen ions. When I'm getting hydrogen ions out of the body, I am going to be regulating my pH. So this is just a flow chart of what's going on. High protein diet, it's going to increase metabolism of amino acids because proteins are made up of amino acids. I'm going to form different types of acid, which is going to increase my hydrogen ion content, which means that I am increasing acidity, which is another way of also saying I am decreasing pH. Man, I am dying to be able to write on something, but anyway, hopefully you can see those. So increased hydrogen ions is going to be pumped into the renal tubules. It's going to be excreted directly in the urine, and then this is going to cause the hydrogen ions, since they are leaving the body, to return back to normal. Now, there's a lot of different regulators in hydrogen ion concentration, and again, this is kind of showing, this is a little deal here. It's a dividing line. These are the chemical buffer signals, that systems that are going to be pretty much, as it says here, the first line of defense, and they act very quickly. All right. These are going to be the physiological, how my body is going to react to it. These take a little bit longer, so they're considered a second line of defense, but they are my lungs, respiratory, and my kidneys, renal. So that's the way our body does things. Again, it says respiratory. The respiratory system breathing can be pretty quick. It is going to address it within a couple of minutes. The renal might take a little bit longer, but this is why I'm telling you, if you ever have lung issues, you're going to put so much pressure on your kidneys to get rid of it, you will eventually have kidney issues. And vice versa, if you have any kidney issues, it will eventually lead to respiratory issues, simply because of the amount of pressure that these systems have on them. So chemical and physiological buffer systems usually maintain the hydrogen ion concentration of body fluids within a very narrow range, like we had said before, 7.35 to 7.45. This is normal pH range. Now, we can get a little bit outside of that. It says survival range. It doesn't take long for you to be in here to produce damage that you will not recover from. If we get more acidic, it is called acidosis. Acidosis is where the pH decreases, which again is another way of saying that the acidity increases. Alkalosis, which is basic, means that the pH increases. And it also means that alkalosis increases. All right? Because again, we're looking at that range as we're looking at this. There's a teeter-totter, right in the middle. So acidosis, all right, results from an accumulation of acids, but it also can be a loss of bases, which we will see. Diarrhea and prolonged vomiting can cause acidosis because we're getting rid of a couple of things that are trying to protect our body. But anyway, all acidosis is a lower than normal pH, and it's usually below 7.35. Again, it doesn't take more to get past that to really be a problem. Alkalosis means that I'm now increased it. So I've increased the pH above the normal 7.45. And these things can happen in two different ways. So acidosis could be respiratory, lungs, and it could be metabolic, kidneys. If it is respiratory acidosis, there's an increase of carbon dioxide and carbonic acid levels. So there's a couple of things that can happen here. This is the reason why for respiratory. Something's caused me to decrease the rate and depth of breathing. I'm having problem breathing, and certain diseases can cause that. Obstruction of air passages. This is going to basically stop, my ability to breathe easily, and also decreased gas exchange. This is diseased lung areas. When we have things that are causing our lungs not to have things. Or again, we could have, if you have cancer and you have to have part of your lung removed, that's going to decrease your respiratory zone, and so you're going to decrease your gas exchange. And what happens is you will start accumulating carbon dioxide. That's going to lead to respiratory acidosis. Right? Now, on the other side, metabolic, which is the kidneys, right? So I've got some kind of kidney issue, which it's not excreting the acids efficiently, or if I have an excess production of acetic ketones. Now, this is called diabetes mellitus, and this is where our body isn't producing enough ADH and we're going to the bathroom too much. And so when we're doing that, we're losing glucose and we're losing the different electrolytes in our body, and our body will start trying to burn fats at an abnormal rate, and that's going to produce acidic ketones and proteins as well. Anyway, that's going to be accumulation of these acids, and that's going to lead to metabolic acidosis. Also, as I just said, prolonged diarrhea and then prolonged vomiting because it's going to get rid of some of the alkaline things that are there protecting our body. So we're losing bases, and it's going to lead to acidosis. This is problems with this is all addressed and my kidneys not being able to get rid of them fast enough, whether it's because I'm producing too much or I have lost things through some sort of disease process, the bases that I needed, but it all goes back to the kidneys aren't getting rid of things fast enough. Whether it's the kidneys problem or not, they're not getting rid of things fast enough. So that's metabolic acidosis versus respiratory acidosis. So if we look at the opposite end, alkalosis, we just said respiratory alkalosis is about the lungs, metabolic acidosis or alkalosis is about the kidneys. So respiratory alkalosis is when anxiety, which is going to lead to hyperventilating, right? Fever, poisoning, and high altitude. Now, a lot of this is different things going on, not necessarily all leading to hyperventilation, but that is a problem. I'm breathing out too much carbon dioxide. So I have an excessive loss of carbon dioxide. So that's going to decrease the carbonic acid and decrease the hydrogen ion content. So I'm going to be sliding closer to the 7.45 or past it, and that's called respiratory alkalosis. I can have gastric issues that are going on, vomiting again, because this time, if we're vomiting, there's two things that can happen. If you vomited so much that you start feeling the bile, they say, come out, you're starting to get into the alkaline stuff, but at first you're losing gastric secretions. And diuretics, which again are causing you to go to the bathroom, where you're going to lose a lot of acids. You're going to that's going to increase the alkalosis, and that's going to be leading to metabolic alkalosis. If I start taking too many antacids, please understand we don't need to be taking a lot of antacids. If you're having heartburn all the time and taking antacids for it, you need to get that looked at. That is not good. But you're going to end up, taking in a lot more base items, alkaline items, and that's going to lead to alkalosis. Now, alkalosis, I just want you to know, is not the common one. Acidosis is far more common. There's a lot more that goes into making getting us more to go along to the alkalosis side. Now, our body's always going to compensate. That's what our body does. That is the essence of homeostasis. If something goes one way, we've got to turn it to the other way. So there's a resistance to a pH shift during the acid-base imbalance. It's accompanied by changes in the action of various chemical buffers, respiratory CO2 excretion, and renal hydrogen excretion. So if we start taking too many antacids and we start slipping towards metabolic alkalosis, our chemical buffers are going to start releasing hydrogen ions, trying to counterbalance it. We're going to have our breathing decrease because we're trying to conserve carbon dioxide because that's going to act as an acid. And the kidneys are going to start shutting down those pumps that are trying to push the hydrogen ions out. So that's a compensation mechanism. Compensation for respiratory acidosis due to pulmonary disease. Chemical buffers bind to the hydrogen ions because they're increased and they try to remove them from body fluids. Since the respiratory system is unable to help with compensation, the kidneys are going to kick it into overdrive and try to remove more hydrogen ions out. And again, that ends up causing a problem to them.